So my first real exposure to a computer was when I went to college. My first email address was my Berkeley email address. So I was really a blank slate, but I got exposed to computer science, and I became extremely passionate about it. I took my first computer science course at Berkeley, and I said, this is it. This is what I want to do for my career. It was very clear to me. So it was a very powerful experience coming to Berkeley, and after I graduated, I felt great. I have this really wonderful skill set. I'm very passionate. I'm going to take that out to the world, and I'm going to start working. So that's what I did. I joined a software company, and I started working in Silicon Valley. Of course, that's where some of the best software comes from, so I was in the right place. And I was doing that for about a year, 2 years, and that was really going great. I was loving it. I worked at a large company, software company. I worked at a small company. I worked at startups. And it was going good, except a feeling started growing in me that while I was working on technology, the stuff that I was doing, the way I was putting my skills to work was great. But at the end of the day, the work that I was doing was only impacting a small proportion of society. So I was creating some cool software, but ultimately it was impacting and benefiting somebody that looked like this. And over time, I felt that I wanted to do work that impacted someone that looked more like this. So this was just a feeling that was growing in me. So I said, well, okay, well, I have these great skills, but how can I really reach a person like this with my skill set? So that's where I said, well, the trajectory that I was going in Silicon Valley wasn't going to get me there. So what do I do? So I looked for places where I could potentially put my skills to use in that way. And I found that around the same time, fortunately, there was a group of academics in research, in academia, also asking the same question: how can we put information technology to use for social development, for reaching unreached people, for people who are disconnected? So I said, great. I quit my Silicon Valley career, and I applied to graduate schools, and I got into a few, and I ended up going to Stanford. And that's where I began my research work on sort of design technology to reach a person like this. So the first thing I did, I came to India. I was born and raised in the US. Of course, I'm of Indian origin, but I really hadn't spent much time here. So the first thing I did was just come here and observe. I didn't really want to do anything. I just wanted to be. I just wanted to observe and learn as much as possible. So I spent a lot of time in the field. I worked with embedded myself with a number of organizations and got really interested in particular in agriculture. So this is a picture of Development Support Center. I should say DSE up there. It's an NGO based in Ahmedabad. I'm sure you guys are familiar with it. And so with DSE, I was exposed to agriculture and specifically information communication to agricultural communities. One of the most powerful tools that DSE used to reach rural communities was radio. Right? And radio remains one of the most powerful mechanisms to reach rural audiences, even in India today. And so I was very inspired because it was really, there was a simple radio program. They had a 15-minute program on Akashvani, broadcast every week. It's no longer there anymore. But for 15 minutes, lakhs of farmers in Gujarat were tuning in. They were very engaged with the show, and they were actually getting something out of it. The advice that was being disseminated was really useful. So there was something there, right? So clearly, we saw a couple of things. One, there was a need for information. There was a thirst. Yes, you're a small farmer, but you have the same sort of information needs that I do sitting in front of Google, right? Typing in. This person doesn't have Google, so the next best thing is this. He has a need for information, right? But he doesn't have a way to really access it on demand. So radio was the closest thing, is not only give people access, but give people a way to interact. So that was one of the other things that was lacking. Yes, I could hear a radio program, but it wasn't very easy for me to interact with that content, to interact with the people producing that program, for me to ask a question, for me to suggest another program to create, for me to learn something else. And very quickly I learned that there are people, in communities, in rural communities, there are people who want to share, not only to ask a question, but to share their own knowledge. The guy in the blue shirt, his name is Babu Bhai. He's a farmer. At this time, he was 17 years old. This is in Banaskantha district, very rural place. And his village is like nomadic. So they don't really necessarily have one place. They just go from place to place. At this time, they were in like kind of very remote area in Banaskantha district. And we had gone there to visit him in his village. And he was showing this contraption he had created. It's this, basically it's this thing he had created to ward off pests in his field. 17-year-old farmer. And it was a great success. All of the other farmers in the village have sort of started to regard Babubhai as this expert. And he was explaining to us how this thing works, and he was very proud of it. And then he pulls us aside, and he says, he very humbly whispers, kind of, he says, I want this contraption to be shared with all the farmers in India. I want all the farmers in India to benefit from this. So that really, really struck me, because as he said that, I realized that he really doesn't have a platform to do that. How does Babubhai get his invention out there? How does he share what he has to know? So that really stuck with me, and I was asking that question, how could we provide a way for Babubhai to share what he knows? And so we started experimenting with a number of things. One of the things we realized is that while these farmers don't have internet, they all have mobile phones. They don't necessarily have smartphones, but they have regular phones. And they know how to interact with a regular phone using voice. So we thought, how can we leverage what they do have? Not requiring them to get anything else, to buy anything, to learn anything new, but just leverage with the existing technology that was there. And what we thought of was using the mobile phone and using specifically the medium of voice. Because going back to give this person a voice, Babubhai needs to be able to communicate in his local language. He needs to be able to overcome maybe the literacy barriers that he may have. And he needs to be able to do it through a phone, which is the one device that he has. So we thought about creating a mobile voice-based system for him to access and share information. So we went out to the field. We did a lot of testing. We did a lot of, before we even built any technology, we did some flashcard-based testing to try to hone in on this idea of a voice-based system. I ended up developing a system. It was in collaboration with DSE and researchers at UC Berkeley, at Stanford, and at IBM Research. And we created this system called Awaaz, which is basically a voice-based forum for farmers to access and share information. I ended up doing my PhD work on that, the design and usage of that system. It was quite a success in its small way. And as I was doing that work, a number of organizations heard about it and said, this is interesting technology. You're using voice messaging essentially as a medium to share information amongst a community who is disconnected. That's great. Can we use that for our own purposes? We're not working in agriculture, but there's nothing specific about agriculture in this technology. Right? We're working in education, we're working in health, we're working in labor. We want to still use, what we're looking for is a communication mechanism to reach people who are disconnected. So we saw that there was a really inherent, latent demand for a communication mechanism that reaches people who are hard to reach. So there's a number of different ways in which we've kind of shaped the technology to reach people in different ways that is of use, of relevance. So the first thing we did was a series of products or technologies that let you just disseminate information, get information out to a group of people. So I'll talk a little bit about that shortly. The other thing we did was create ways for organizations to collect information from people very easily using voice. So things like a voice survey. You call up a phone number, you hear some automated prompts, and you enter touch-tone input, and that automatically gets captured by the system and available for the organization to download. And then, of course, as I mentioned with the farmers, a question and answer, social, facilitating people sharing amongst each other. So these were various things that we tried. One thing that we realized along the way was that from a technology perspective, there was a common thing that everybody wanted to do. And that was the simple thing of sending a message out to a group of people. So we took that idea and combined it with this sort of thought that, 500 billion text messages are sent around the world, in India, just in India, not around the world. 500 billion text messages in 1 year. Why are there so many text messages in a country which is is steeped in a culture of orality? Why, with so much, with so little, with a lower level of literacy, right? Why is there so much texting happening? Why isn't there more voice messaging happening? So we took that thought and created this product around group voice messaging. And that's one of the main things that we do now. It's a we basically, the story here is that we took a bunch of complicated things and made it very, very simple. Simplified into one thing. Send a recorded voice message out to a group of people. So that's what we have now. It's called Streams, and it works like this. There's 3 steps. One step, you create a group. So you do this online. You go online, just like you would go onto your Gmail or your Twitter account, and you create a group. You add members to that group by adding their phone numbers. Then the second thing you do is you record a message. You call up a phone number. Your group has been assigned a phone number. You call it up. You record your message. You can do it over the phone. You can also record it over the web. Okay? Then automatically what happens is that message gets sent out to all the members of the group through a phone call. So again, they don't even have to have a mobile number. It can be a landline phone number. Everything that can receive a phone call is in play. So they just pick up the phone. They hear their phone rings. They pick it up, and they hear your message. And they can also respond. So unlike SMS, which is difficult because it's typing and it's cumbersome and so on, here they just press 1 to record a response. A beep sounds, and you just start speaking your response in your own language, and it's very simple. So this is kind of one of the main things that we do, and there's a way to manage it over the web. This is hard to see. So we launched this product 2012, and since then a number of different usages and use cases for this technology has developed. Our thought was exactly that we were going to create something very simple, right, like SMS, send a voice message out to a group of people, and people will find different ways and creative ways to use that. And so far, that's happened. This is a graph just showing the growth of the system. This is like 2013 numbers. So things are growing quite steadily in terms of the number of broadcasts being sent out and the number of members being reached. Sorry, these numbers are cut off, but it's now approaching 2 lakh people reached through all of these thousands of groups created by hundreds of people. So this is a graph showing 2012 numbers, and the reason I showed it is because I wanted to tell a story. You see the blue line jump up in November, and that was related to this Gujarat election stream. So there was actually a group out of CIE that wanted to put this technology to use, and it was around the time of the Gujarat elections. So what they said is, people who aren't accessing the web, they still are very interested to know what's happening with the election results, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to set up a stream, one of these Awaaz Day phone numbers, and we're going to basically have a group of people sitting on their computers, sitting on their laptops, and getting the latest election results. Every 15 minutes, we're going to collate those results. We're going to record as a voice message the latest results, and we're going to upload it to this stream. And we're going to advertise this phone number in a very simple way. They printed out some simple flyers. And they printed about 50,000 of them and put them in 3 districts in Gujarat, just distributed them. Very, very simply. In one day, in several hours, it generated 35,000 phone calls. This is a 50,000 flyers turning into 35,000 phone calls. So that was like a huge jump in everything that we did. It kind of brought our whole system down because it was kind of a big spike. But the main thing it illustrates is that there is a lot of power in delivering information to people where they are. It's not just information. Of course, it's content that people care about because the election results were something that people were interested in. But it's meeting them in a place that they are. All that people had to do was dial a phone number. In fact, in that case, it just left a missed call to a phone number, and it called them back, and they could hear the latest results. So a simple, tweak of making something accessible goes a long way. Since then, we've done a lot of stuff. In the way of evaluating these technologies. What is the impact? What is like the bottom line? Okay, great. People are listening to election results. People are sharing music. People are sharing jokes, songs, and that happens. But what's really happening? Is this actually impacting in a more tangible way? So we're in the middle year 2 of a 3 or 4 year impact evaluation, a randomized control trial, so a formalized impact evaluation of one of these systems where a group of farmers are getting access to information delivered through Awaaz Day. Another group of farmers are getting access to regular agricultural extension workers who are going out and speaking with them. And another group are not getting any access, and we're seeing what the results are. So far, the results have been very promising in that the farmers who are getting access to this content through this simple voice mechanism are making better decisions. They're making better farming decisions. So they're taking the advice that's being given on this system. They're actually putting it into action. So behavior change is happening, which is a very difficult thing. But it's happening, and it's leading to more productivity amongst those farmers. The other point to mention here is that its impact, its behavior change at a very cheap rate. So rather than sending a person out to speak with all the farmers, which is time-consuming, it's expensive, it's oftentimes slower, we're just sending phone calls to 1,000 people or 10,000 people, and it's achieving similar, if not better, impact. And so that becomes also a sort of a cost savings. There's much more leverage from a cost standpoint. It's very cheap to do this. So there's a bunch of things that we're working on from a technology perspective to improve this technology. But really, our design principle of simplicity will remain. We want to make this technology simple because that's what lets people access it more easily. I want to share, because this venue has been giving me that opportunity, to talk a little bit about startups. How many people are interested in starting their own company or have a startup or are looking into that direction? Okay. This is targeted at people. This is targeted at you all. So this is just some observations I've had in the last year or so doing my own startup. This is my first time starting my own company and running it. So I've learned a lot. I made a lot of mistakes and continue to make a lot of mistakes. But there was one thing that I've noticed, particularly for me coming from California, from the Bay Area, from Silicon Valley, which is sort of the mecca of startups, right? We all look to the startup world in the Silicon Valley as the gold standard. I've had some reflections on that. Does anybody know who this person is? Does anybody know what this is? Creative Commons? So this is Lawrence Lessig. He's a law professor at Stanford, and he's created Creative Commons. He gave a TED Talk. I would really encourage you to listen to it some time ago, maybe like 6 months or a year ago. And he was talking about, in America, how the political system has really has lost its way. In particular, it's very easy now to basically buy your way into a political seat. And really, like, the richest few people in America control all of the, who gets, who goes up for elections. Elections are becoming much more expensive to run. And so it becomes just this money game. And so he says this is one of the most critical challenges to American society today, right? The richer you are, the more political clout you have. And this kind of marriage of politics and economics will ultimately bring down all of what makes America so great. He said a throwaway line when he was giving this talk. It's such a big, important problem he was talking about. At the beginning of the talk, he says, because he's in this kind of Silicon Valley audience, he says, you all are, people at Google and Facebook, you're working on self-driving cars and you're working on Google Glass and all this stuff. This is the most important problem. Like, those are easy problems. We think that these things are so difficult. That's easy problem. This is a hard problem. You should be paying attention to this problem. So I started thinking about that. I said, that's interesting, right? I mean, what are the important problems? Then I was watching television sometime later. I was watching the NBA Finals. This was in the States. So the basketball championships. Huge television event. The television commercials during this event would be insanely expensive, millions and millions of dollars. One of the commercials was for this startup called the dollarshaveclub.com. This startup basically sells you razor blades. You subscribe, you pay $1 a month, and it sends you razor blades. And I was really confused because they're spending millions and millions of dollars to shoot a very, very slick, like, fancy commercial for, like, a pretty stupid thing. Like Dollar Shave Club? Like, what is that? Like, why is that showing up in some of the most expensive television commercials in the world? I looked a little closer, and who's read this book? Who knows this book? Do people know this book? So there was like a reference to this book in the commercial. So, like, this website, this startup, is following these sort of lean startup principles. Is doing the thing that's really going to try to help it grow, right? It's trying to it's doing this commercial in a very fancy spot, and it's going to be great. But at the end of the day, it's selling razor blades, right? Like, millions of dollars here for this stupid commercial for this stupid startup. I mean, think about that money being used for important causes, like what our other speakers are working on. So it just made me think that some of the way that Silicon Valley is going in terms of just trying to create that next idea that goes viral, there's something wrong with that. There's something that's missing in that. There's a soul aspect that's missing. At the same time, I was in California, and I spent 10 days meditating at a retreat. And I spent most of those 10 days in this building. This is a pagoda. This is a meditation pagoda. So this was a very, very incredible building. Like, it was just very beautifully constructed, amazingly constructed, in fact. And after I had finished the retreat, I asked about this building and said, who was behind this and how did this get built? It's a really amazing building. And the people said, it was built for a few $100,000 and mostly by volunteers, but it's like an incredibly high quality building. And when I look at this building and I asked them, they said, this building is going to last 500 years. right? For a few $100,000, a building that's going to benefit so many millions of people, potentially, so many hundreds of thousands of people to go in there and meditate, costs a few $100,000 a year. Meanwhile, this Dollar Shave Club is spending millions of dollars a year on these commercials. So there's a disconnect here. And my plea, essentially, is to say that for us in India, there are so many important problems that are there for us to work on. There's so many important problems. And so, yes, it's great to start a startup, but really it's important to pick problems that matter. It's really important to pick problems that matter because there's so many problems that do matter. There's many problems that don't matter. And it's important to just not look and say, well, Instagram has made $1 billion, so let's create an app for me to share images. Because there's a lot of important stuff that we could also be working on, right? And that reminds me of this book, Jugaad Innovation. So people talk about Jugaad nowadays in India and kind of glorify it. It really makes me cringe. I actually do not like Jugaad. The reason is that when you talk about Jugaad, it's basically saying I'm going to do something in the short term that works because in the long term I don't care. To me, that's what it means. You have to do it in many cases. Our society is set up that a lot of times we have to. But really, we shouldn't be glorifying it. We should be trying to create longer-term solutions. We should be trying to do things that last 500 years, like the pagoda. We should not be trying to do things that last 1 month, like the Dollar Shave Club. So that thought reminds me of this person. Everybody know who this is? So he was, different in a lot of ways. His mentor was this guy named Mike Markula. And he said something very, very powerful to him. And it's mentioned in the biography. He says, if you're trying to start a company, that's great. But you shouldn't be trying to start a company to make a lot of money. That's a bad reason to start a company. He says 2 reasons that you should be starting a company. One is to do something you believe in and do something that will last a long time. Those are the two metrics that he gave Steve Jobs. And of course he achieved that. But I hope and encourage all of you to look to create Apple instead of creating the Dollar Shave Club. And with that, I thank you.